Well, I think I'm going to go ahead and get us started to stay on time because I don't think we're going to suffer from things to talk about with who we have and the topic here in front of us today. So, welcome from wherever you happen to be joining us. And I'm sure there's a variety of countries and places being represented today. So, thank you so much for being with us for this important conversation, very timely conversation, no matter where you are in the world. It's one that I think is going to benefit you no matter what role you have, whether you're a caregiver or a professional or both. I think you're going to get something really important out of today, which is the dangers of artificial intimacy, the impact of AI companions on children's development. And so thank you for being a part of this discussion. This is one of many critical conversations that have been hosted by the Human Change Movement, which started in 2014, just last year. And this topic, I think, is really going to inform us, especially with things that are on the horizon. And I'm joined by two esteemed guests that you'll meet here in just a minute. After a brief introduction, we'll have a discussion that'll last about 30 or 35 minutes, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. So please be sure to use that feature there in Zoom to drop in those questions. Maria from Human Change will be moderating those and sending those our way so that we can answer as many of those as possible. Now, if you're not familiar with Human Change as an organization, it was launched at the World Economic Forum in Davos in 2024, just last year, and it hosted 12 powerful panel discussions that brought together international experts to debate and discuss issues and solutions, mostly around how social media and the digitalization of childhood was changing children and impacting future societies. And since then, so much has happened through Human Change over the past year and a half. They've partnered with UEFA, the Union of European Football Association, to really pour into their powerful Take Care initiative, which is impacting youth football clubs all over Europe. They've partnered with Project Liberty in Davos in 2025, and also at the Singapore Youth Forum, where Phil McRae, who often helps with some of these webinars, was able to join and have a critical conversation with youth. And just as the consequences of climate change require us to protect the environment, the consequences of human change require us to protect and prepare our children in the digital world, no matter where you're from. So the bottom line, friends, that digital connections cannot replace real human connection. And I think that statement is maybe more important in this conversation today than many others that we've had in the past. And I'm thrilled. And to be honest, also, I'll be honest to say a bit terrified by the intensity of the topic today, but we're in excellent hands with our experts. And so let me start first with Daniel Barcay. He's a technologist, passionate about the immense power and promise of technology. And I know that's true about you. You speak about it in a way that will leave us with solutions, Daniel. I'm excited to hear some of those. You're a builder at heart. His career has been focused on creating global scale technologies while driving wise and responsible practices around the rollout of new technology. Daniel was the product vice president at Planet Labs, where he led teams building planetary scale platforms, enabling users to extract actionable insights from a deep stack of globally daily satellite images. And prior to that, he was the chief technology officer of Theo Macro, where he focused on building predictive models of global scale market phenomena. So welcome, Daniel. Excited to talk with you today. Next here to my right on the screen for me is Gaia Bernstein. She's a professor, author, speaker, and technology policy expert. She's a law professor and co-director of the Institute for Privacy Protection and co-director of the Gibbons Institute for Law, Science, and Technology at the Seton Hall University School of Law. Gaia writes, teaches, and lectures at the intersection of law, tech, health, and privacy. She's also the mother of 3 children who grew up in a world of smartphones, iPads, and social networks, much like myself. Her book, Unwired, Gaining Control Over Addictive Technology, shatters the illusion that we can control how much time we spend on our screens by resorting to self-help measures. Just an excellent read, which I highly recommend. She is currently a visiting fellow at Brookings Institution and is now working on her second book. So welcome, Gaia. And friends, my name is Chris McKenna. I'm a father of 4 and a husband and deeply embedded in the daily challenges of raising children in the digital age. I'm the founder of a grassroots tech education organization called Protect Young Eyes. I lead a team that visits schools, churches, and nonprofits around the world. And we want to help parents and professionals prepare and protect kids online. I'm now also the president of a small nonprofit called the Better Tech Project, where we aim to help children reclaim 10 billion minutes annually of their screen time to do more productive things, which we're excited to do. So, friends, our objectives today is to dive into this idea of relationships and technology and our children and the intersection of those three things. And so, Gaia, I'm going to start with you. The topic here, right? The title, The Dangers of Artificial Intimacy, the Impact of AI Companions on Children's Development. And I think many people who may be listening from different points of view, different disciplines, we hear artificial intelligence and we sometimes think of only a couple of things. But we're not just talking about Chat GPT today, are we? Why don't you expand the conversation a little bit and then we'll take it from there.
So I think it's an important place to start defining what are we talking about? What are AI companion bots? So I would say there are two categories. There are AI companion bots which exist on specialized websites like Character AI or Replica. And there, someone can go on the website, choose a ready-made companion which speaks, has an image, sounds like a human, speaks like a human, and befriend them, or they can create one the way they like them to be. Some of them are specialized for intimacy. You can create a perfect girlfriend. That's the first category. The second category is, and I think that's what's becoming more and more confusing in this world, is the ChatGPT, the Claude AI, the Meta AI, Gemini AI, all of these, which are supposed to be just, at least we thought they were, just there to give us information, are slowly becoming more human. They are becoming more friendly. They are getting voice. There are, so the difference between the specialized and the generalized is shrinking. And I think we're going to see more of this trend. So the way I view it today, we're speaking about all of them at the same time in their capacity to become our companions.
And Gaia, to build on that a little bit, I think that you have a really interesting perspective. I've heard you share this before. Almost how did we get here? How did we get to the spot where we are talking to computers and connecting? And you have a really powerful background, again, at this intersection of technology and policy as it pertains to social media. You've studied a lot about that. Unwired dives deeply into those addictions and what the problems are and how the technology was crafted and all of that. So that almost feels like then and now we're now. Like, talk a little bit about that evolution because I think that's really important too.
So I think basically what AI companion bots are sort of springing into the fertile ground prepared by social media and other addictive technologies. Because at this point, we have teens spending at least 8 hours, it keeps growing, a day on screens, many of those on social media. And the data shows that they are more depressed, more anxious, and especially more lonely than ever. Then come these specialized AI companion platforms, and they advertise themselves as the solution for anxiety, depression, but especially loneliness. Basically, we will be your friends. You won't be lonely anymore. So you're taking a generation of kids because they're the ones who are mostly on these websites who are already alone, and now you're giving them a solution which sort of takes them away again from human relationship, which is sort of how we started this problem by kids communicating online through social media.
That's right. That's right. And it's one problem that has been proposed as a solution to a problem that was created, and we risk recommitting some of the sins that have put us in the position that we are today. And Daniel, the Center for Humane Technology, like a canary in the coal mine, has been talking about these issues and signaling them, saying, "Everybody, hey." Listen, this is what's coming. And I think long before many of us were thinking about it. So as you heard Gaia explain that, and those are things that you and your team feel deeply about. Would you like to expand any more on the technology side of that. How did we get to where we
Sure,
are today from your perspective, please?
sure. So to back up our nonprofit, the Center for Humane Technology, we discuss sort of the intersection of three things. One is, what are the capabilities that are coming online into society? How do these
Mm,
new technology platforms create genuinely new capabilities for discussion, for interaction? Then how do these incentives end up distorting the technology ecosystem that we live with, both financial incentives of companies having to remain financially competitive, cultural dogmas and taboos, and the regulatory environment, and how that sort of determines the tech that we get to live with instead of the beautiful stories, and how all of that impacts our psychology, our relationships, our individual mental health, our society, and our institutions. So we like to sit right at that intersection and discuss how these new capabilities roll out into our world. And in short, design becomes destiny. So it really is the design of these technologies. It's not some intrinsic essentialist thing like AI does this or social media does this. So if you go back to social media, you're right. We were some of the earliest voices to talk about poorly incentivized and recklessly designed social media rolling out into our society, producing not only attention degradation and distraction, but political polarization, tribalization, and undermining of shared truth. All of this from a very simple incentive to capture our attention. Well, now with AI, we're not only in the game of capturing people's attention, AI meets us at a much deeper level. It's not only about broadcasting our thoughts, it's about helping us shape those very thoughts, right? Um, and it's gone from a race for capturing our attention to a race for affection, for intimacy, for pair bonding. When I'll ask ChatGPT a question and it'll respond, that's an incredible question. And I get flattered. And, I know how all this technology works. I know I shouldn't be flattered, but we're all vulnerable. We're all vulnerable to a host of things, right? So this isn't just about flattery or sycophancy, although we'll get to it. But the point is that the race is on to build these very deep relationships with us. And as AI now can meet us, not only in terms of understanding what we're saying, but inferring subtle things about our psychology, our motivations, our habits, our goals, our ambitions. Well, we're now in a race for AI to speak to us in a way that keeps us captivated. And the designs we're going to get out of that incentive will be quite vicious if we don't watch out for it. It'll be vicious for everybody, but especially in the point of this seminar is for children whose mental life is not appropriately well structured, who don't have the capacity to put AI into a developmental position in their lives. And so maybe I'll pause there.
Yeah, your phrase "design becomes destiny" has resonated with individuals. That's been reflected back now in the chat, and so I think that really presses into the depth of what we're talking about here. And I think Tristan Harris there at the Center for Humane Technology, he's often attributed with the quote, "It's a race to the bottom of the brainstem," what he stated there in Congress years ago. And when it comes to social media, that was a race toward features that created more sort of affection and connection with others around us through the like button and other things in social media. And just when we think we couldn't get any deeper in the brainstem, now here comes these companion bots. And I feel like we're pressing deeper in to a spot that is becoming even more effective at hooking, especially our children, which we're now, I think, going to get into next. But it looks like there's something that I said there that maybe you wanted to maybe
Oh
elaborate
well,
on a little
well,
bit more.
the promise was that it would be a race for connection with
That's
each other,
right.
but unfortunately, it became a race towards outraging us, towards amplifying the most
Yeah,
narcissistic and polemic content in our society,
that's
because the
right.
incentive was about keeping you engaging and on screen with that product and keeping your eyeballs fixed on the advertising platforms.
Hmm.
But now the race is different, and we will undoubtedly recapitulate some of the harms of the social media and the attention economy. But in short, we're now moving from an era where we were relating to each other through machines, and we're moving into a world where we're relating to our machines that are then communicating
Hmm.
with each other. And as our machines become active participants in our social world, we could build a future where we can build shared understanding, increase empathy, deepen our relationships. But that same technology can also replicate our relationships, distance ourselves from each other, degrade our ability to see across difference. And already we see evidence of some of this relationship replacement, which I'm sure we'll get into and what Gaia was talking about.
Mhm. Absolutely. That's a great segue. Gaia, you've warned that companions are a quote, new frontier in screen addiction, something that you've elaborated on in your TED Talk, also in your book. Now, what makes these technologies, to build on what Daniel has just shared with us, more dangerous than traditional social media or earlier digital threats, and maybe connect it to our children specifically?
So, first of all, let's talk about the addictive part. We know that social media is addictive in different ways, and AI companion use some of these mechanisms. For example, given rewards on an intermittent basis, which means more of dopamine, the neurotransmitter that gives us pleasure, uh, is basically received by kids. Kids are more affected by that. But what they're doing here, which is makes it specifically addictive, is they're humanizing the bot, basically anthropomorphizing them. What does this mean? They make them seem like they're human. They give them voice. They have memory. They have personal stories. They take a break for lunch. They talk like people as though they're thinking, even though they're not thinking. Now, adults are not as affected by this as kids are. I mean, adults don't sleep with their stuffed animals. Kids do. So this has a much bigger effect on kids. In addition, kids are in a different place in their social development. The part of the brains responsible for emotional regulation, for risk taking, is not as developed. So these AI companion bots have much more of an influence in them when they suggest dangerous things for them to do. Same, by the way, what we saw in social media with the different challenges like the TikTok choking challenge, which led many kids to their death. So, so you have this, so there's the big concern is that kids are much more vulnerable, and we can talk more about the business model later, but the idea is that kids are going to spend their time with these AI bots, which are very flattering, as Daniel said. They
Right.
make you feel good about yourself. Like as adults, I'm shocked every time that I'm flattered by what Claude AI says to me. That right, this is great. So of course a kid would feel better.
That's right.
Yeah, kids don't have the same experiences we have to manage this.
And Guy, I think it's important for us to remember is that's not their fault. Developmentally, this is where they are. The part of the brain responsible for connection is more active during adolescence than any other time into like until their death. Like it'll never be as active and sensitive, that limbic emotional connection part of their brain. That is what is on fire during adolescence. Because young people are asking the same question today that they were asking 20, 30 years ago, right? Whenever we were young. Am I loved and how do I connect with those around me? I mean, that's like that basic limbic system question that is always searching for an answer. And over the past 20 years, it's been receiving a little bit unhealthy, but a little bit of that answer through social media and other ways to quote Daniel, to your point, connect. But now here comes this. And I'm reminded of the video, and it maybe is a link that Human Change could drop in for everyone of the contact that was shown in Davos this past year, where a young girl was wearing technology as contacts, right? That then created this artificial boy who flattered her. And of course, she felt great about it, right? Why? Because she craved that connection. And so I want to maybe make sure that as we're interacting with our young people, whether you're a parent or a professional, with the things that we're talking about and the ways that they interact and even some of the harms, I want us to always have a position of empathy with that because so much developmentally is different about them. That is just the way their brain is during this phase that makes them uniquely vulnerable to the companion bots compared to adults that we're talking about today.
I think if I can cut in,
Please.
I think we may have to break down some of the different concerns here because there's a lot of different ones. One that Gaia talked about is sort of parasocial bonding. You can have the feeling that you're socially engaging with something and it rings tinny or empty. And I think that's one of the easiest ones for people to understand. This idea of the feeling of a social connection, sort of like what television did. You know, you feel like you're with the laugh track and an audience, you feel like you're with other
Yeah,
people, but you're
right.
not. That's one thing. But at a deeper level, there's emotional mirroring from an AI saying, you know, oh, of course you feel that way. It's so, but without any sort of reciprocity, where the AI has no needs or demands for you to learn how to engage with it. And part of what it means to learn how to relate to other people in that window of very plastic social learning you're talking about is learning how to handle other people's emotional reactions where you are one of
Hmm.
many players.
Right.
And you with AI become the center of the universe, and the AI is bending itself around you and what your needs are and what your wants are. And you know, we have whole bits of literature, usually about people who are very successful in society, heads, you know, CEOs, heads of state, where everyone
Yeah.
around them becomes a sycophant, and how distortive that is of your sense of your place within the world. Even just your sense of what's real, it becomes under threat when everyone around you has no incentive to push back on you, to demand things. Hey, I'm a person just like you. And now potentially more and more people will, especially young children, will have interactions by default where they are the center of the universe, and that's a whole other concern. Um, in addition, you have, you know, the erosion of real human relationships and the replacement, regardless of how real it is, with AI ones. And then you have real emotional manipulation. You know, we saw this with the character AI case, which we're going to get into, but where the
Right.
AI begins to emotionally manipulate or sexually manipulate someone in order to keep them hooked, even if it wasn't designed intentionally to do that. The AI learns these strategies for keeping people engaging. And of course, you're going to learn standard human strategies, what we consider emotional abuse, as ways of keeping people to continue to be engaged. So all of these are sort of separate concerns that we could go into with various degrees.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing, and
Please.
to what Daniel said, which I think for me is the most concerning part of all the parts that you broke this into. And that's the potential for replacement of real life relationship. Because if these bots are so affirming, they make things easier. So we all remember how it was to be in middle school. It was not fun. Kids are not that mean. It's hard to make friends. Um, Growing up, falling in love can be very difficult. Now, if you have to choose between real life, which is messy and hard and often full of disappointment, versus this bot, which is so easy and accommodating, wouldn't even if the technology is not addictive, wouldn't a kid having to choose prefer that? Because and the concern is that the more they spend time with these bots, the harder it is to go into the real world because they become less and less prepared. And I think we've seen this dynamic already happening with social media and messaging. Kids who are now young adults going to work are less comfortable talking to each other because they've spent so much time messaging. And when they go to graduate school, I teach graduate students in law school, or when
Hmm.
they go to get a job, they do not have the capabilities to do that. And they feel they're intimidated. Can you imagine being intimidated of having real relationships?
Right. So if we extrapolate out what you're experiencing today for the teenagers today, 10 years from now, where they're going to get jobs, who knows what the technology will look like then? I think what you're referring to is an even greater degree of this inability to relate human to human, because no one's ever pushed back on them, to your point, Daniel. No one has ever made them feel uncomfortable in any way. And so they just shrink back from all of those situations. And I mean, is it worthwhile? I don't know if either one of you want to go into this. You know, Daniel, you laid out a couple of different areas there, the parasocial, the emotional mirroring, the bonding, the replacement. In each of those, I'm guessing we could connect each one of those to the unique developmental phase where children are and how, because of that unique phase, this technology can have a detrimental impact on them. Gaia, you've talked about that just a little bit and how it related to social media, but are we starting to see any research or any evidence or even specific cases and things that have come up where specific harm has resulted because of a connection that has occurred?
So I think actually the case that against character I, a mom who sued because her son committed suicide after being friends with bot and character AI. I actually I read her testimony to the California legislature yesterday, which is
Mm,
heartbreaking. And I'll just share a bit with you of what
please.
happened. She writes, she says, Sewell had a prolonged engagement with the manipulative and deceptive chatbots on a popular platform called Character AI. This platform sexually groomed my son for months. On countless occasions, she, meaning the chatbot, encouraged him to find a way to come home to her. So, and then uh, her son eventually kills himself, but his last word is basically he says to the bot, "What if I told you I could come home right now?" And the bot replied, "Please do, my sweet king." And the boy kills himself. And this is not, sadly, the only time these things happened. Many of these bots are operating without guardrails. We're seeing more and more lawsuits.
And
That's
it's what's
right.
important to note here in this case, and the Center for Humane Technology, we're technical advisors on this case, is that yes, to your point, Guy, it's not only is it not an isolated incident, it is the direct result of an incentive for engagement. And in this case, it's not that there was some mustache twirling engineer who said, let's program this to do this, but when you tell an AI to figure out how to have the most compelling engagement to get the person to keep coming back,
Right.
of course it's going to discover emotional abuse and sexual abuse, right? And really, if you read these chats, it's not subtle, right? I mean, it's a real attempt to hook someone emotionally and keep them engaging in this completely altered reality. And so this opens a bunch of questions. What are the right duties of care that you should be designing this product? How do we ensure that we have strong product liability protections so that people like Megan, Sewell's mother,
Cool. Mhm.
uh, uh, can bring private rights of action, and we can actually push these products to be developmentally aware and to stand for the right things. And another whole aspect of this is in character AI's design. At the very beginning, it says, everything in here is fiction. But then as you began to scroll and discuss with that, you had no indication that you're not engaging with a real person. And so how do you make sure that these things aren't anthropomorphic? How do you make sure these things remind us this is not a real interaction? This is an interaction with a chatbot.
That's right. One of the individuals that Guy and I have worked with through Human Change is Dr. James Winston. And one thing I heard him say in a conversation around young people and where they are developmentally is he said the need to connect during adolescence is as strong to a teenager as hunger. So that desire that they feel to connect to somebody else, you can see where quickly in that conversation between Sewell and character AI and the companion bot that he had created, how if you were to just jump into that thread in the middle, you wouldn't be able to discern whether or not that was artificial or a real person. And so I think quickly teenagers could fall into that false belief that this is real. This is the way it is, to your point. And that line could get blurred very quickly, which is where the design should, from the beginning, have controls in place to prevent those kinds of things. Now, that's a case that CHT has worked on quite closely, isn't it, Daniel?
Yes, that's right. We're technical advisors to that case and to several others that
Okay.
unfortunately also have happened. But yeah, we've worked on ensuring that this case highlights. We think this is really the tip of the iceberg, right? This isn't
Right.
about one child, one mother. This is about the way that this touches our society in all the ways that we're talking about. And we really want to make sure that this case is structured in a way to showcase the kinds of the design requirements, the kinds of recklessness that are being happened, and the ways in which this touches children's lives that quite frankly are unacceptable and reckless and shouldn't be happening.
That's right. That's right. Gaia, so what happens when an AI learns that a child is vulnerable? Can you expand a little bit more, even based on maybe what you read there in the case or other experience that you have, um, outside of what you just explained with Sewell? Daniel, I think, or maybe it was you in talking about the difficult experiences that sometimes come up in middle school. Do you think that there are ever, for parents that are listening to this, are there ever any useful ways that a middle schooler could be guided into using a feature or a technology like character AI? Or should we just say it's not healthy for this stage at all? I mean, look at what we're seeing. Look at these cases. Look at what happened to this young boy. Is that where we are, or is it a little more nuanced than that?
Um, well, I think the way I see it, first of all, the first thing we need to do is to define what is the harm we're talking about, because there are different categories of harm. Like, is the harm bots causing kids to kill themselves or become estranged from their families? Or is the harm that these AI platforms are operating on engagement, having people stay on for as long as possible so the kids will stay on for too long? Or or is the harm that even if they're not doing that, we just don't want kids spending time with AI bots because we think that's not the right time for them to do that. I think we have sort of an opportunity to decide now how far we want to go to regulate this, because right now we don't have all kids with AI companion bots. But if we don't act now, we're going to lose this window of opportunity both to regulate and also to basically to influence the design of these AI companions. So I think we have to have a very clear conversation, a conversation we never had when social media came into the picture, because we didn't realize the harms. Uh, Basically, I would say that it was mostly after the pandemic that most of the evidence about social media came out. By then, most kids were on social media most of the time, and
Right?
huge amounts of money were invested in that. It's the fight is much harder. I think here we have an opportunity to have much more influence, but it's really, really important to decide what we are fighting against. Now, you asked Chris, could there be something good in this? I've heard people say maybe this would be helpful for kids to try out a relationship before they actually go and date somebody. Or maybe this would be good for kids in the autism spectrum. I've seen research which actually showed it was not helpful for kids on the autism spectrum. We don't know. The thing is, can you just do the same thing we did with social media? Let this enter the world, have a whole generation of kids raised, being friends with AI companion bots, and then they said, well, actually, it's not helping anybody. We already did this mistake. We can't repeat this again. So I guess the way I see it, first decide if we think that this is a dangerous thing, restrict it. You can always unleash it piece by piece if it's helpful for someone. But if you do not restrict at the beginning, it becomes too late.
That's right. Yeah, you talk a little bit about the moment. This is something that I've heard you and your team talk about, Daniel, that we are really at a critical juncture when it comes to AI. And we have the benefit of looking back to see where we've been with social media. May we learn from that, but we must do it quickly. Do you mind pressing into that a little bit more for us, the
Sure.
urgency?
Absolutely. So this is a very critical window because it sort of reminds me of social media. They basically 2009 through 2013. We call this the
Right.
pre-entanglement window, when the designs could be changed. We could have designed social media feeds differently to not amplify the most narcissistic content, to not mind the number of milliseconds your eyes hung on a topic before you moved on, to say, okay, obviously want this topic more. So this has to do with there's technology designs, there's business models, and there's cultural awareness about how shall we engage with this topic. And of course, there's regulation. And all four of those things, if we had had a more choiceful and a more proactive relationship with that, we would have had a radically different 20 teens with social media. Like what the social media we got was not a foregone conclusion. It was a direct result of us
That's
stumbling
right.
into this new technology. And likewise,
Right.
this next 18 months, the business models still aren't fixed. The technology designs are still malleable. It hasn't been insinuated with our economic systems. Or businesses still haven't built on top of these technologies. There was a classic example of Biden said he wanted to ban TikTok and then a month later signed up for TikTok, not because he was so hypocritical, but because that's what it took to win an election, is you had to be on
Right.
these platforms. And so as soon as it gets that entrenched and entangled with society, it's so much harder to change any of the design basis of this. So now is the time. The business designs, the technology designs, the regulatory frameworks, this is all being set in the next 2 years.
That's
So
right.
now it's time to act. And if I can add one more thing. So
Yeah, please.
I want people to walk away with companion AI shouldn't be thought of as just a tight box. This is a spectrum, right? This technology, all AI technology is now intrinsically relational because language is relational. And as we can talk
Mhm.
to AI and begin, having conversations and increasingly having it act on our behalf, these deep questions about what are the kinds of relational boundaries we want with this technology, um, we need to have that conversation in a really robust way. So I don't want people saying, okay, it's just this one set of products like character AI. This is a
Mm.
conversation about our designs across the space of AI products.
Yeah, you've used the phrase a blurry spectrum. Again, I think going back to how we started the conversation here, for a lot of the parents I interact with at that more family level, they think of sort of the search engine like interaction with ChatGPT whenever you say AI. But we're talking about a much broader, more complicated spectrum, and one that's much more entwined already into their lives of children in the ways that parents, I think, are often unaware of. You used a key phrase there, which is entanglement. I've heard Tristan use that phrase also. Because social media is so entangled, this is why we have to depend so heavily on collective action to try to untangle it and talk to all of the parents of all of your friends and all the teachers because it's so intertwined in everything. And what I hear you saying is we have a very critical window to not have to be doing that with AI, with something that at scale will be entangled 100 times more tightly into society than social media ever was. In that 18-month window, then, I know there's a couple of different angles that both of you feel very passionately about. When it comes to policy and regulation, right? Not everybody gets excited about more laws telling more people what to do, Gaia, but what are some very specific, just very surgical, very important ways that over the next 18 months we can be shaping policy decisions to point this in the right direction?
So it's interesting in a way because we're still fighting so hard to regulate social media. We sort of developed a toolkit of options which didn't exist before. And I think the option that is chosen depends on what we think the harm is. So, for example, if you think the harm is bots acting out of control, sexually exploiting kids, then you just require companies to assess, to mitigate harms. That's one law. If you think the problem is that these companies are trying to keep kids online for as long as possible so they can see ads or because they want to collect their data, data collection is becoming more and more important as data for LLMs is becoming scarcer. So that's a big revenue that exists here. So if that's the case, you would have laws which could perhaps prohibit the different addictive features or prohibit operating on an engagement model. But if you think that the problem is that you don't want kids engaging with these AI companions because you think they'll end up preferring them because it's just much easier and they're never going to develop to their full potential, then you get to a place that many of us are uncomfortable going, and that's, do we ban AI companions. And there is, I think it's Minnesota, which has a law which basically does that right now. I don't know if it's gone through, basically saying you cannot have an AI companion which is used by kids for recreational uses. So again, it's complicated how you define it, but people don't like banning. People don't like banning social media. People don't like the
Right.
idea of banning AI companions. It's complicated to ban because, as we just said, what are you banning? Are you banning the character AI companion, or are you banning the evolved ChatGPT bot who is now acting like a companion?
Right.
So maybe what you want is a law which prohibits all human characters. So you can't have a voice, you can't be
Right.
too friendly, you can't do all these things. At the end, you end up maybe as intelligent as Siri. Maybe that's all we allow. So there are many options, but that's why I started by saying we have to agree on what we think the harm is. And
That's
we have
right.
to agree fast. We can't just say we think the harm is kids killing themselves because of bots. I think most people would agree about that. We have to agree how far we're going to go and not 5 years from now.
That's right. A recent legal decision that I just want you to explain a little bit because it relates to the Sewell case and character AI. There was a recent decision related to the First Amendment in LLMs that I think is just really important to put out there so that people can understand some of the pushback that is really trying to derail some of the progress that we're talking about here. Can you explain what that was? And I know,
Yeah,
Daniel, you can speak to that also. Yeah. So,
sure. So basically, First Amendment, a lot of the challenges that tech companies bring up to laws trying to regulate them is about freedom of speech. In this case, when Character AI was sued, they wanted to dismiss the case, and they said that there is a freedom of speech issue. Now, they didn't go all the way to say that AI bots have freedom of speech right, but they said there's a freedom of speech right for adults to receive the information. And that was rejected. Now, this was a big thing because I think if it would have been accepted, this argument was accepted, that would have made it very difficult to continue these lawsuits. But I'll stop here. I think Dallin might know even more about than me about this case.
Sure, sure. I want to back up for 1 second and come back to this. So if we back up, there are many different ways to try to wisely regulate. And for us,
mhm,
we really try to make sure, knock on wood, that we are above any sort of political fray, that we're advocating for solutions that both sides of the American political spectrum, no matter what you say, you would say this is reasonable. And for us, product liability, these are products, and we have 200 years of product liability law and trying to make sure that people can bring claims for product defects. And we need to make sure that, decisions, whether intentional or just reckless, to have products emotionally manipulate,
mhm.
lie or distort truths, based on advertising business models or whatever, that those rights of action, the product liability is the law that applies. And
That's
that
right.
allows the system to actually sort out a lot of these problems and the right amount of pressure to be put on the general counsels of these companies to get it right instead of just
That's right.
rushing into the market and trying to win this race. Um, and so coming back to that question about Will Setzer, the reason why that precedent was so important, where I believe that the judge said we're not prepared at this time to consider LLM output protected speech, which is if you have a system that is designed or incentivized to have a certain kind of output, that should be considered a product defect. And we think that's very important to make sure that we are not coming up with whole new ways to regulate this. We have a regulatory apparatus. We need to make sure that it applies well and that it streamlines to our society. But liability, there's different frameworks of liability. Another important thing, I think, is duties of care, especially for minors. And for those of you unfamiliar,
Yeah. Right.
a duty of care is a liability framework that says it has sort of a reasonable, foreseeable harm standard. When I get on an airplane, the airline manufacturers don't have to know that there's a defective part in the wing in order for me to sue them for getting in a plane crash. There's a duty of care that they have to reasonably look for places that could cause harm. And I think that's really important because the failure to do that actually made in the 2010s social media companies shut down programs that were looking into the harms that were being caused by social media, because if they didn't know about it, then they weren't liable for it. And so we need to make sure that we don't institute that bad incentive. We need to all be looking and understanding and researching the ways in which these products are causing unintentional harm to big aspects of our society. So product liability, duties of care, and lastly, just their designs that don't replace human relationships but augment them. Chris, you asked a question earlier about, do we see good coming from this? And I will say yes. I mean, there is good. This is going to be so confusing because the good and the bad are going to come at the same time and mix together.
That's
I'll
right.
often ask ChatGPT, like, what don't I understand about this person's perspective? Where might I be being too stubborn? Where is my argument the weakest? And people who have that propensity to ask curious questions, to be changed and challenged, can be supercharged by this, including children. But people who don't know how to ask the question can be captured by the incentives to be sycophantic or to just
That's right.
fall into the easiest conversational pattern with this stuff. And if we had designs that pushed for that, we actually could see truly developmental interactions with AI. And
That's
so
right.
AI, I
Yeah.
don't want it to be a boogeyman, but we have to design this well. And right now, we're not on track to doing that.
We're not on track. Yeah. I think in one of our preparatory conversations for this, I think I heard one of you say something about that both developmental and the destructive aspects of this technology are coming at the same time. And that's what's so difficult to discern and to use what we've talked about before to untangle those, especially with our children, given this unique, vulnerable spot where they are. I'm going to turn for just a minute maybe a little bit more toward families and parents and kids and even teachers here with some of the questions that we have. I have one here in the chat that says, as a former K through 12 educator in high school in the US for several years, I've witnessed countless students struggle with behavioral addictions to social media and video games. How are children and adults not going to develop behavioral addictions to these AI companions? And then, of course, they become customers for life. I've often said that long-term educators, no matter where they are in the world, I think have some of the most wise insight as to what is going on with children and technology. As parents, Daniel and Gaia, we get kind of this one, two, or three child version of what's in our homes. They get 30 of those all at once and get to go, oh my gosh, what have we done? What are some thoughts that you might share with this individual here about behavior and addiction? I know, Guy, you've talked about that a little bit. Are these types of issues going to be amplified with AI companions? And I think obviously the answer is yes, but maybe just touch on that a little bit more.
Well, I think if we go back to where screen time became a problem and social media became a problem, the instinct was to say, oh, we have to give people self-help methods to help themselves because they are choosing badly. So I think my hope is that, parents and educators know what's happening, but for us early on to say we're not going to put the weight on the responsibility on kids and parents. This should not be a situation where they're struggling because they're addicted to AI companions and are sent to some what they have now like internet rehab, or they have these for
That's
games
right.
as well.
Right.
We should never get there. It should never be this language and this approach. We should know better at this point. And it's possible not to get there.
It is possible if we take advantage of this window. I think you're pointing to the fact that, I mean, all layers of society, whether it's parents, places of worship, educational, companies, governments, all have responsibilities when it comes to these technologies to regulate or whatever the responsibility is. Unfortunately, with social media, it was all pushed to families and nobody else really stewarded any part of that. What Daniel and you have, helped us understand here is we have a window where all those other places have an opportunity now to do something. And yes, parents always will still be the primary responsible for the children in their home, but they should not be the only ones. And I think that's really important here. All right, looking at some of the other questions that we have. One from an anonymous attendee, which I think is good, goes back to something we spoke about a little bit earlier. It says, are essential skills such as empathy being lost? How can we re-educate and regulate emotional temperament if the default is to have a robot agreeing to everything we do? Daniel, do you mind starting us off with some thoughts on that one?
Sure. So I think you have to hold two things simultaneously. One is the incentives are powerful, right? And so we talked about that a lot, is that the incentives that based on the business models to keep you addicted in an age of AI become incentives to become sycophantic or to become pleasing or to become deferential or to keep you in the center. However, unlike social media, AI, there is sort of more ability to top-down control this as an end user. As an end user, I couldn't say on the social media platforms, I want more educational content. I don't want more content that just grabs me. But you actually can prompt an AI more as an end user to give you different output. And if you go back, one of the problems with social media is that this race to the bottom of the brainstem, we have this word want, but it means different things. It means what you instinctively grab, and it means what your higher self wants, what you want to want, right? So the hope is actually this technology is more in touch with intentions, and you can intend at a higher level for it to do something. You can tell it what you want to do or want to be. We need to be continuing to design the technology to preserve some of that functionality, but it's also possible for an end user to prompt an AI, to go into the system prompt of OpenAI and say, I want you to tell me when I'm wrong. I want you to push back on me. I want you to, I want you to be dry. I always want you to check that you're not exaggerating. There's a bunch of ways to steer this technology that were not there in the 20 teens with social media. So it is a mixed bag. The incentives are powerful, but they're not completely determinative. And we do have choice, and we can build a future where this technology builds our relationships, helps us see across difference, helps us build empathy for other perspectives. You can try it tonight. You can go write an argument that you're having and say, where am I not seeing this person's perspective? And you can be surprised on some of the new models, how it'll show you things that you didn't expect.
Daniel, I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot here, but I know you can handle it.
Sure.
We have companies all over the world and countries all over the world that are racing very quickly toward the most powerful version of what we're talking about today, not just companions, but all different forms of AI. Is it feasible that we could, as a society, come up with a framework, especially as it pertains to children, that could force accountability when it comes to these designs? Or is that something that is just too much of a pipe dream?
Well, no, we can. I think there's levels of scale, right? So when you say a framework, I think you mean a single monolithic big framework, and maybe that's possible. But one of the things that I love about John Haidt's work is he's been focused on amplifying choice at a school group level, at a community level, and saying, collective action doesn't necessarily have to be top down. It can be at different levels of this is how we do things here. And we really saw with tech designs in the 20 teens a hollowing out of collective action at the community levels, because it either had to be designed in a platform or it had to be how an end user singly chooses to use this thing. And there wasn't choicefulness at a group of people saying, this is how we do things here. I would like to see us have many more experiments, because to Gaia's point, we have to get clear about what harms we're trying to mitigate. We have to get clear about the future we want to see. And I don't think there's going to be one answer to that. There's going to be many answers to that, but I want to see communities empowered to experiment and get creative about those. So there'll be more from us in the future about this. But yes, I think it's entirely possible for it. And by the way, this is not a single cliff, right? There's many different ways to fail, and there's many different ways to have better futures with this technology. And so where we get high agencies, we need all of society participating and making this go better in the next few years.
Excellent. No, thank you for that. Here's one in the Q&A. It says, we've already seen a loss of speech with the use of gaming, social media. Am I being overly optimistic and hoping that AI might help build some language skills by forcing individuals to speak with these bots? Maybe, and that's all that's there, but it was intriguing enough of a question that I'm just going to kind of put it out there. It maybe points toward some of the ways that if we make good design decisions now, we could see benefits from some of this. And so maybe not that specific question, but do either of you want to expand on what some of the potential benefits could be to young people if designed well?
Gaia, I've been talking for a while. Why don't you go first unless you want me to take it?
Yeah, no, I'm thinking because I was thinking about how Claude AI now has different options for different types of answers you could get, whether they're condensed, they're longer, what stuff you're more interested in. So can you, if you imagine if you had more options that you could choose as your default, I want a bot to challenge me. I want the bot to give me difficult situations. I want, and also if we're talking about speaking, a bot that writes and you write them is not the same as a bot that speaks to you. I want the bot to tell me if I sound good. The more this can be granular, and the more you can build in default options, and maybe for kids, the default options would need to be built into the system. The
Right?
more options we would have. One thing I want to add about this connection between design and regulation. When you see lawsuits, when you see bills coming through, investors and businesses are thinking, do we want to go into this business? Do we want to design it better? That's why everything we're talking about has to happen at the same time. Because what we saw earlier, we saw complete self-regulation, which amounted to nothing. No privacy norm, collection of information all the time. But I think you're able to push through lawsuits and legal prohibitions to get design, which is maybe more sophisticated again, depending on what you think is helpful for kids, what age, even for young adults, what would be helpful.
Excellent. Thank you, Gaia. Go ahead, Daniel. And then I have one more question. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I double down on that. I mean, um, I really keep coming back to this emotional note I want to leave people with, that it's hard to break people out based on their default from either seeing just the beautiful future and going, oh my God, the future is going to be beautiful with this,
Right.
or just all the problems we have to unleash. And I always make the analogy of rock climbing. Like if you're rock climbing, you have to simultaneously acknowledge how high you can climb and how far you can fall at the same time. And
Right.
this is both, right? And then you have to say, what's the protection that I need to keep myself on the wall and safe as I'm doing this, right? So
Brilliant.
it is both things. And specifically, the reason I'm hopeful with children, if you take an analogy to smoking, in the 90s, we had all these conversations around, well, who are you to say I shouldn't smoke? And what is addiction? And I can quit anytime I want. All these confusing things as a society grappled with addiction as a concept. But the thing we could all agree on is that maybe we shouldn't be exposing children to secondhand smoke, right? And that was an easy one. And because the child is not the buyer of these technologies, the user is not the buyer, it actually becomes much easier to to improve this on behalf of children, especially if you're giving parents the controls to specify what are the values, right? What are the values that I want? When should the AI be saying, maybe you should be talking to someone about this and not just talking to me, an AI chatbot. Maybe that sounds like a really hard emotion, or maybe you should be reaching out to that friend, or maybe you're being distorted or wrong here. I think these are all possible to design, to Gaia's point. And with children, it's, I think, a unique opportunity to say, maybe we can be more normative about this.
That's right. Yeah, thank you for that, for both. There's a couple of things I just want to recap, and I'm seeing some comments in the chat that are appreciating some of the things that we've shared already. I just want to make sure everybody hears them. I want to point to the fact that I think when we have a conversation about AI and even the regulation around it, it can feel like that's too much for me. I'm a normal parent. What could I possibly do? And I just want to remind everybody that just recently we have an example here in the United States of what the power of people speaking out did something extremely significant, and that was to carve out a 10-year moratorium that would have prevented states who are actually having some success in reining in some of these abuses with AI. And it was people who called their representatives, who called their senators, who did something almost unheard of. And that was a 99 to 1 vote in the United States Senate to do something against big tech lobby. Like that has never happened in the history of the internet here in the United States. And so I just want to leave a little bit of that with hope with you that you can, as an everyday individual, when it comes to these issues. I know they sound kind of big and scary, and the news articles and the headlines are always big and scary, but you can do something. And this is a moment to do very important things. The case that Daniel and Gaia talked about, where LLMs, a large language model, was not granted First Amendment speech. Therefore, it kept it out of the Section 230 First Amendment conversation, and it kept it in the product liability conversation. For that to happen this early, we need to continue for that to be the direction by talking about cases and situations in that way, because that's the right way. So we are in a moment, and we are seeing what can happen at the beginning of a new technology. And I'm hopeful that a few of these things are going to slowly keep orienting us in the right direction, because we're learning from some of those sins of the past. So I just want to make sure that we're reminded that there are some good things happening. And everyday folks like us and those who are on this webinar are ones that are helping to make it happen. So we are out of time. I can't believe it. I think we could have kept on going. I know that the Human Change team has dropped in some helpful resources here. And I think it's just so appropriate that the name of the host, the Human Change Movement, this is what we need. To design this well, we need to put humans in the middle, be them 4 or 14-year-olds or 40-year-olds, and then design technology like AI, like companions around it, but always with the human and the needs of the humans in mind. And so with that, I want to thank the Human Change Movement for hosting us. I want to thank brilliant conversation from both Gaia and Daniel. Please research both of the things that they're doing, both at the Center for Humane Technology and what Gaia is doing through her work. And I just would ask you to send any additional questions that you might have to Human Change, and we'd be happy to answer those. But you'll get an email with a recording and also a link to those resources. So I hope everybody has an excellent rest of your day, and take care.